Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this virtual artist talk here for our Sparkplug show. I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to all the artists that participated in this show today. Well, when we first came up with the idea of doing a physical show, there was obviously some pushback because, for obvious reasons. And we would have been totally okay with understanding everybody's needs and desires to be safe. But the artists really came through. They did this show, and I can't imagine this show virtually. It is such a great and visceral show. So I want to say not just how much I appreciate the artist coming forward and doing this show, but just how much I admire them for doing this. This is something they didn't have to do, and they stepped up and did it. So you guys, each one of you, you've got my kudos. I also want to give thanks to Armando and all the DCAC staff that make this happen. Armando's been working his butt off to make this video for you today, and it's really great. I think you're really going to enjoy what he's done, as well as Leah Lewis and Tori Doverspike and Jerry Trong, who've been working so hard to make all this happen. So that's all I wanted to say. Thanks a lot. Thanks for coming in tonight. Armando, back to you.
So now we have Jerry Trong, our program manager, who helps manage Sparkplug.
Okay, hi everyone. Well, thank you for joining us today for the Artist Talk in support of our exhibition, States of Being. My name is Jerry Trong, and I'm the program manager here at DCAC. And this is the place that really champions like artists who make challenging work, with the core mission of being an alternative art space for the support of like local artists. And Sparkplug is our like art collective, and one of the core programs that we have with the idea of assembling artists from all different walks of life. Like they may be in different stages in their careers, have varying levels of training, sometimes very different artistic approaches. And we bring them together to basically form a community of peers, right? So the Sparkpluggers, they meet once a month to do critiques, they socialize, they personally support one another. It's a 2-year program, and DCAC provides Sparkplug members with instructional workshops, networking opportunities, in addition to 2 exhibitions in our art space. So they get 1 exhibition at the start of the program and 1 at the end. This is the closing exhibition for this really wonderful group of artists. So before I introduce the person who will be leading the Artist Talk, I do want to mention that we will be opening up applications for the next cycle of Sparkplug sometime early next year, with the program possibly starting up in the second half of 2021, when hopefully it'll be safe for us to have meetings in person again. Right? So be on the lookout for information about that. We'll post the application and information about it on our website, in our newsletter, and on social media. All right, now it's my pleasure to introduce the curator for this exhibition, Fabiola R. Delgado, or Fa, as she likes to be known. She is a Venezuelan human rights lawyer turned arts and culture strategist. She's an independent curator who has worked with and collaborated with institutions such as the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, the Hirshhorn, the Embassy of Spain, the Washington Project for the Arts, to name a few. This exhibition would not have turned out the way it did without her incredible dedication and generosity. So I'm so happy now to turn it over to you, Fa.
Thank you, Jerry. That's so sweet. I wanted to thank, as well as you put it, and Armando and B, I wanted to thank all of you, as well as the artists. I think this was a very interesting opportunity to curate a show. It's always an honor. And for this particular group, you already existed, which was, I think I mentioned at the early, January, I think when we first met, how special this was for me, because the Sparkplug Collective already existed since 2018, this cohort in particular, and for to be selected to close the program for all of you was really, really unique. We are in the year of 2020. This was definitely a most particular year to co-create this exhibition together. And I'm just really excited. I'm very, very thankful for all of the artists and the team, Armando, Jerry, Leah, and B, of course. So thank you for having me here. I think that to go through, more or less the rules of what we're doing today and what we're expecting is that for states of being, we had to think of a theme, and that was a collaboration. I came, early on in this year saying, I can't just be a dictator and choose what artwork's gonna be. You already existed. So it really became a collaborative effort to think about a theme, names, and through the conversations with the different artists, all 10 of them, we really created something really beautiful called States of Being. This was mostly inspired in Zygmunt Bauman's, a sociologist, liquid modernity concept. And by that, he really meant that we are not post-modernity. He doesn't believe that we're still in a postmodern society, but we're still melding and molding, and we're still in a very liquid state of our present. He defined, or he distinguishes our present state of mobility and uncertainty and continuous evolution. He contrasts us from a solid modernity, which is, Industrial Revolution. This is what happened and this is what's happening. So I think that really inspired all of us into rethinking what it means to be remote, especially obviously for the obvious reasons of 2020, without reacting to our reality, rather to have a dialogue with it. I think that's what really emerged from all of us, and hopefully, you all enjoyed the experience. And for all of you, visitors, if you've been to the gallery, I hope you also experience a space as a reflective space and not just another, day at a gallery. It really means a lot for all of us, and especially for the artists, for this really interesting year of not doing physical artist studios or social activities. We really had to rethink what art meant for all of us, how we make it, and how we exhibit it. And so I'm really proud. I do say that to everybody early on, that I'm just so excited to see how the art of all of the artists has evolved, not just during this year, but seeing their previous work compared to what we see now in States of Being really, really made my heart race. Having said that, we are going to show a video from all of the artists. This will be their introduction, which Armando so gracefully edited. And after the video, we're gonna have a brief break, about 5 minutes to stretch, refill our drinks, and then we'll come back for a light conversation between me and the artists, as well as a Q&A. So take notes. You have time to experience the video, take a little break, and then come back with us for your questions.
Hi, I'm Alanna Reeves, and I'm a multidisciplinary artist working in printmaking, painting, drawing, fiber arts, and occasionally writing. I use these mediums to explore identity in terms of race and nationality as rooted in the family. And I first began to explore these themes because identity was not a conversation I had readily when growing up, but as an adult, it's become increasingly important for me to develop a vocabulary for it. And so a lot of my work incorporates items from the family archive, like photos, memories, and oral histories. The start of Sparkplug for me was also the point at which I knew I wanted to expand on my practice by having dialogues with others on their identity. And this is something I feel like I've made steps in within this group. A large part of that has, of course, been conversations with the other artists, teasing out ideas, and there's been the best kind of accountability in that after voicing ideas and intentions, you have a whole group of people that are there to hold on to those ideas for you, help you keep those goals, encourage you, and check in with you. So, in discussing identity and wanting to open up that dialogue, it has made me consider what were the building blocks I had in order to understand myself, and what other foundations might people share with me. These questions have led me to things like childhood games and creative exercises like coloring books, craft kits, dolls, and a myriad of other things. And so I started to consider these activities and moments in them where, even though a guide is provided, there's still no accounting for the history, worldview, and perspective that someone might bring to them. I'm really interested in that even if something is meant to have one final solution or outcome, still someone might create something completely different from it because they interpreted it differently. They're missing a piece of information, or their imagination was too big. And even more so, what does it look like when you take all those things, all those activities that we've used to build ourselves into the people that we are today, and revisit them as adults? What new information will we get from them? What did we build and have to break down to truly understand ourselves? Is there something we still feel isn't quite right with our identities? The works that I'm presenting in States of Being are still personal in that they are very much a display of activities that I used to do when I was younger. They express my own insecurities and indecision, but they also attempt to address these larger questions and open up that dialogue. And I hope that they'll serve as a prompt for you to consider your own building blocks for identity.
Hi, my name is Lizzie Sampson. Thanks for joining us today as we talk about our work. I want to tell you a bit about the paintings that I made for this show, as well as some of my art processes and what I'm interested in making work about recently. So I'm an oil painter and I've been making work in DC, but I was living in South Africa for a while, making work there until the pandemic happened. And I grew up in Pakistan and Asia, and so a lot of my images are inspired by things that I've seen there and things that I've grown up around, specifically in terms of landscape, as well as structures and forms that I've seen during my different times in different homes around the world. The work that I made for this show are 2 oil pieces on panel, and they're part of a larger series of work. And they are asking some specific questions through the painting in terms of how we understand environments as they are shifting around us and how environments change over time. Specifically, at what point is an environment being regenerated and at what point is an environment decaying? My paintings are inspired by my personal environment and also shared spaces, as well as landscapes from the natural world. This year in particular, I've been interested in human determination despite changes in environment, as well as open expanses. I've had the opportunity to go to the desert recently and notice some new colors and new open spaces there that have really informed my color palette and compositional choices. I paint in plein air a lot before I return to my studio, and the plein air work informs my color choices and my understanding of environment and space. When I return to my studio, I like to create a composite landscape of many different environments that come together, and that often takes some time to kind of figure out what works and what doesn't work. And I enjoy using images from my own experiences as well as shared experiences that I've had. And I'm also interested in how the climate is impacting the landscapes around us. So the works I made for this show are kind of a composite of images of people and places that have been impacted by climate change. And then it's also incorporating landscapes that I have found that are inspirational in terms of the beauty that they offer. So I'm kind of juxtaposing these 2 landscapes together and working to understand when places are falling apart and when places are being rebuilt, because I think there's often a tipping point between those 2 two different spots that space can be in. Something that I've learned from Sparkplug is just how important it is to have that community of artists to get feedback from, and then also just to make friendships and to build an understanding of different styles of art making and different art practices. Something that's really great about it is that everyone's at different levels in their art career, so we always have something to learn from each other no matter what state you're in. So I really appreciated that. We're really excited that this show is in person and that you can come see the work for yourself by appointment. We're also excited that we can have this artist talk and be able to share experience with you. I look forward to making more work, and thanks for listening.
Hi, my name is Madeline Stratton. I am a multidisciplinary artist and educator living and working in Washington, D.C. I am originally from Memphis, Tennessee. I did my undergrad at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, where I studied studio art and history of art. After getting my master's of art history in New York, I eventually landed in D.C. about 5.5 years ago. After moving here, I worked for a brief time at the National Gallery and then actually went back to graduate school to get my MFA in multidisciplinary art from the Mount Royal School of Art at Maryland Institute College of Art, or MICA, up in Baltimore. I have been part of the Sparkplug Collective the past 2 years, which has been a wonderful experience. When I am not in my studio making art, I teach upper school art at St. Albans School up by the Nashville Cathedral. My studio is in Northeast DC in Montana, Motor Inn, and I've been there for a little over 2 years. In my practice, I'm interested in memory, specifically memories of domestic spaces and how we remember those spaces, and also the objects that occupy those spaces. I'm interested in how we give importance to certain objects in our memory and how everyday domestic objects can hold importance to us in our lives. I'm also interested in how we remember the architectural elements of spaces that we have occupied. So the work that I have in our Sparkplug show, as well as work that I've been making recently, I base off of my own memories of interior spaces. They are spaces that I've occupied in some way but can no longer return to, whether it be the house I grew up in, an apartment that I lived in a few years ago. It kind of ranges, but basically my sort of rule and premise is that it's a space I can no longer return to. I work from my memory, so I do not use reference photos. I do not go back to those spaces. And I sketch out the main architectural elements of that space and then translate that into sculptural paintings, and most recently freestanding sculpture as well. My background is really with painting and printmaking, and so paint is definitely my comfort zone. So I tend to use a lot of paint. I also use textiles and hand stitching in my work as well. Some of the pieces that are in our Sparkplug show are part of a newer material exploration for me, where I have incorporated things such as vinyl, more iridescent fabrics, some neon paint, and also acrylic plexi, and sort of layering those materials in my representation of these spaces. My color palette tends to be based off of objects that occupied those spaces, whether it be the color of a lampshade or a rug or a chair. But again, the work in this show, I decided to push the color palette a little bit more. Given the current state of the world, I decided to really embrace using kind of more fun colors and being a little bit more out there with my color palette, my materials, than I have been in the past. So I hope that these pieces have a little bit of a sense of joy in them right now. In terms of my experience with the Sparkplug Collective, it has been so lovely being with this wonderful group of artists. They have inspired me so much, not only with, the thoughtful feedback that they've given me, but also watching them grow and watching their work progress over the past 2 years. I know that I can reach out to any of them for anything, and they've really made me feel like I have an artistic home in DC. As of now, for me, in terms of my own work, I'm really looking forward to working more with textiles and using those as a bigger element in my work. And I'm also interested in doing more sculptural work and really coming off the wall even more and doing some more freestanding sculptures. And I would just like to end by saying thank you so much to DCAC for all of the wonderful support the past 2 years, for putting together this show, especially during these unprecedented times. And I'd also love to thank Fa for being such a wonderful curator to work with and having the best attitude and giving us such a positive experience. So thank you.
My name is Sarah J. Hull. My work explores the natural rhythmic variation that occurs in daily existence and the repetition that's found in science, mathematics, and nature. I utilize textile materials in my work primarily because of their innate intimacy and also traditional hand embroidery techniques. At the foundation of my work is my experience in architecture, science, music, and philosophy. And all four of these come together to form the foundation of my work. After that, a lot of information, a lot of inspiration comes from the process itself. As I'm working on a piece, whether it's a technical study piece for the Royal School of Needlework in the UK or working on a piece of artwork, I'm continually exploring, observing, looking at the interaction between the materials, looking at the stitches and the background, the lighting. All of these components come together to give me information to inform further work. As I'm working on a piece, I'll be taking notes, either taking photos with my camera or taking notes in my sketchbook sometimes. When I see these moments, when I see things beginning to happen and occur in the pieces. When I'm working on pieces, typically my viewing distance is about 5 to 10 inches away. So to me, while very intimate, it also feels monumental. And one of the major shifts that's happening in my work is that I'm moving from the smaller size, which is typically around 8 inches by 8 inches, to a much larger size, topping out currently at 54 inches by 54 inches. I really wanted to create an opportunity for people to see, to view what I see, what I experience so close, but on a human scale. One of the fantastic things, one of the really interesting things about this is to see how the materials change as not only in how they function differently as they increase in scale, but how I have to work differently as well. It's a fantastic process. It's super exciting to see where this takes me. It's one of those moments where you have all this information, you have all these tools, and then you say, what if? This happens a lot in my work, and that's where a lot of the exploration happens. If you're interested in learning more about my process, seeing examples of some of my technical work, and getting those insights into some of those things that provide me inspiration for my pieces, follow me on Instagram. Until we're able to meet again in person, stay safe.
Hello, my name is Sarah Stefana Smith, and my work explores lines of demarcation around difference, space, and ecology. And so I'm actually interested in the relationship between boundlessness and constraint, particularly as it congeals around race and gender, who belongs and who matters. To this end, I make sculptures, photo-based weavings, and installations that use barrier materials. And what I mean by barrier materials are things like bird netting, fishing line, nets, rope. My larger background is in photography, but over the last 2 to 3 years, and certainly during my time with Sparkplug, I've turned more to sculptural and immersive works. And in many ways, the work I produce are in conversation with archival materials, things I'm reading, and the actual way that the material functions. An example of that is reflected in the installation 10 Forms Makes a Village, and this was based on a residency that I got to do in 2019 in my hometown of Columbia, Maryland. So this installation is actually based on the urban planning design by James Rouse, who envisioned this 10-village infrastructure with interfaith centers and educational spaces as the nucleus of these 10 spaces as a way of integrating people based on race and class within the context of what was happening nationally in the US in the 1950s and 60s. And so this work that I produced was really sort of a response to think about, well, what are the challenges and stakes of that kind of integration, and how does that factor into contemporary ways that people experience a place like Columbia? I actually discovered bird netting during my graduate studies, probably around 2010. I was living in a high-rise apartment complex in Toronto and was thinking about wearable sculpture, and noticed that people in my community were actually using this bird netting to obstruct their balconies so that pigeons could not nest. I've certainly appreciated the last 2 years with Sparkplug because I've had an opportunity to build in a structure of accountability and exchange. So I thank you so much for taking the time to hear about the work that the artists of Sparkplug have participated in, and I look forward to being in conversation with you.
Hi, I'm Shana Gunstam. This is my home studio in Bethesda, Maryland. I want to tell you a little bit about my Sparkplug experience and how that has changed my work over the last couple of years. I had been working with wool for about 10 years, and I had been talking the language of a craft artist, but not really the art language. I hadn't been thinking conceptually. I had been relying on my technical expertise to get me through conversations. People always want to know how it's made, and so that's my comfort. To be able to be challenged by this group, why am I making it this way? Why am I making this work? What if I made it bigger? What if I made it this way? All of those questions, genuinely good critique questions, have blossomed in my head and really pushed me to contemplate, to set intentions, to be more direct about something that had come so easy because I hadn't been challenged myself. I know my work has changed. I have taken bigger steps. I have had more courage to try things that may be way out of my comfort zone. I had my first artist residency in Finland, and my first solo show this year in this area. I don't think I would have taken those big steps without the encouragement, without the support, and really without some of the peer pressure. It's slight, but it's been fabulous to watch the other artists in my group work so hard and be reminded that I too can work that hard and excel and be more professional and be more interested in the process. The piece that I have in the show now is so far outside my comfort zone that I don't even have words for it right now. I'm excited about it. I know I never would have gotten to the stage without this group. So, thank you.
Hello, my name is Steve Wana. I'm an experimental artist working in multiple mediums. My background is in music composition, specifically electronic music and sound design. I create 2- and 3-dimensional work and installations. I work in mixed media, including powder pigments, resin, wax. I really like to play with materials. My work is experimental, meaning I am always searching for what materials can do, what they can inspire or suggest. A lot of my work has elements of unpredictability in it. That's true also of my music. There's elements of improvisation in there. At the heart of my work is a desire to blur boundaries, whether physical or otherwise. One of my favorite genres is installation work, and I've done installations ranging from large-scale architectural installations to smaller, more intimate ones. Some include sound, some are time-based, meaning they change or evolve over time, and those are my favorites by far. I find the element of unpredictability built into them quite exciting. The current work in this exhibition is also you could say an architectural installation, but I wanted to create an installation that recontextualized the space of the DC Arts Center without being too intrusive. So I'm working with a material I've worked with before. It's a fabric that is sheer, has a sheer quality to it. It also plays really nicely with light. Depending on how you light it, it can either be transparent, you can see through it almost, or it can become solid. So in this particular instance, I wanted to create something that is somewhat ghostly, that exists in the space and interrupts it but doesn't completely block it out. I'm also using light and sound, and I'll play an excerpt at the end that has a little bit of the sound of the piece. This was a lot of fun to put together and build, and I have to thank the DC Arts Center, especially Bea and Armando, for their help putting it up. I also want to thank Fa for her support, and I definitely want to thank the Sparkplug Collective for all of their support over the 2 years. Despite the fact that we had a pretty bizarre year this year, we still managed to put together a pretty fantastic show, I think. And I'm really honored and proud of everybody for the work they've done. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and I hope you enjoy this little excerpt of the piece titled Within, Without.
Hi, my name is Tom Greaves. I'm originally from Canton, Ohio. I've lived and worked in the DMV for over 35 years. I have had many different artistic experiences in those 35 years, and one of the most rewarding has been when I was selected to the Sparkplug Collective. I think that it's a group of very talented and dedicated artists, and I'm happy to be a part of that, and happy to call them my friends. Well, over the past 4 years, I've been making assemblages using found and collected objects and images. Most are created in boxes, others are freestanding. They usually have a irreverent or humorous, sometimes angry bent to them. I think that they all comment on the struggles of being human. This is our final show, our Sparkplug Collective show, and I submitted a portrait, a larger portrait that I distressed and repaired many times over. I think that it follows along with the same type of a theme as my previous work, but I think it's much softer, much more intimate and personal. The photograph I like to make up a short story in my head to keep the piece moving along, and this was, I imagine, this photograph was taken of a woman as she passed by on a train, and this man is so. This is all he has of her, and so over the years, as he held on to this portrait, it was damaged, and he keeps repairing because that's all he has, and that's what he wants to hold on to.
My name is Alexandra Silverthorne, and I'm a photographer based in Washington, D.C. In my photographic practice, I use the camera as a means to understand and explore spatial environments and encounters, while often focusing on the mundane or overlooked elements. At the core of my studio practice, I ask questions about space and place. What is it? How do we understand it? How do we become familiar with it? Why does it matter? How do we move through and use it? And finally, how can we do this in better and more thoughtful ways? I'm especially inspired by a quote by James Baldwin. He writes, "The world changes according to the way people see it. And if you alter, even by a millimeter, the way people look at reality, then you can change it." My work, currently on display in the States of Being exhibit, evolved from initial images I made in 2017 for an abstract photography exhibit at Studio Gallery in DuPont Circle. Disheartened by learning that 20% of adults in the United States do not believe that there is sufficient evidence of climate change, I asked, how much destruction needs to happen for folks to believe in climate change? When will climate change stop being an abstraction to them? Using projections created by Climate Central, I selected 3 areas of Washington, D.C. that will be flooded in 2100. After photographing cityscapes in each area, I soaked the unprocessed film in boiling water from the Potomac River for up to 83 hours. Afterwards, I developed the film and scanned the negatives to create digital inkjet prints. The uncertainty of the film results echoed the uncertainty of climate change. What will survive and what will be lost? What will be left at the end of it all? Since 2017, I've expanded the series to consider how even if we are able to reverse the course on climate change, our future world still won't look the same as the world we currently know. To this end, site-specific research on local environmental destruction, sustainable practices, and possible futures inform this work, as I've continued to explore vulnerable landscapes and process the film with site-specific natural resources. The images presented here are from a trip to New Orleans. I gathered water from the Mississippi River to process the film and kept the film in the water for several weeks before processing. During 2020, I had scheduled multiple trips to continue working on this project. Aside from an early trip in January, all the others were naturally canceled. While it's disappointing to put the project on pause, I'm also grateful for the additional time for research and refinement. And that time played a significant role in figuring out how to move forward. Furthermore, our final Sparkplug exhibit came at the perfect time, affording me the opportunity to see how the images can work on the gallery walls. A huge thank you to FA for proposing and curating such a thoughtful show, to Carolyn, Jerry, and everyone at DCAC for Sparkplug, and especially to Alanna, Azadeh, Lizzie, Maddie, Sarah, Shayna, Steve, and Tom for their fellowship and generosity these past 2 years.
Bravo! Thank you so much to all of the artists for this wonderful introduction. I don't think there was a better way of introducing all of you. I know that I'm really excited to continue this conversation in just a few minutes.
And Fa, I just want to say thanks so much. This video that Armando put together was just fabulous. And I don't think an in-person conversation could have been more inclusive or interesting for our viewers tonight. And I realize I omitted you from my original speech, and I didn't mean to. We are so honored to have you and to have your influence on the group. I was just privately communicating with Carolyn Law, who had been the program manager before Jerry took over, and she was there when this group started. And this really is a high quality exhibition. It's a high quality group, and I was really moved by all the things people had to say about the quality of the program. I don't want to push that too much because that's not what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about your art, but it makes us feel good at DCAC that we're doing something that matters. And so we thank you all for your participation, and we really appreciate the kind words that you all had to say. So I'll turn it back to you, Fa.
No, thank you, V. It really has been a pleasure and an honor to work with all of you. I do have to give the shout out to Carolyn Law, who's right there. Yay, hi Carolyn. At the beginning of this year, I feel like maybe December of last year, we had our first communication. In January, we're talking about possible exhibition, the possibility of curating a show with DCAC. And the more we talked, it really became a really beautiful collaboration. The first time we met, I feel like was at Tom's house, one of our artists, one of the Sparkpluggers. And we really didn't imagine it was going to be the year was going to be what it turned out to be, and that the show was going to be what we created together. So again, it's been an honor to work with all of you. Now, I think I will start with Sarah Smith. Well, actually, I want to read B, what you said on the chat. You asked a question about, what is the one thing you, the artists, would say to one another, considering, applying for this experience. Why don't we start with Sarah Hall?
I think one of the things to think about when applying for this is to be open and to learn about, I had the opportunity to meet a bunch of artists I only knew by their work, and being fairly new-ish to the art scene in DC and really only through DCAC, it was a nice way to transition into learning more about the art community in DC, but also to be able to put names and faces to some artwork that I've seen over the years that I've come to admire, and to have a peer group, especially in 2020, of people to discuss artwork with as well. That's been super, super helpful and super important. So to be open, and I've learned so much about my work in talking with them by hearing what they've seen in my work, and seeing so many different ways of working has led me to also think further about the ways that I work and approach my own work as well.
Thank you. Any other artists, any other Sparkpluggers, what are your notes? What would you consider, what would you tell someone who's considering applying to this program?
I would say do it. Go ahead and take a shot. I wasn't sure, if it was the right time for me to do that, but it was so grateful that I'm happy that I did, and be open to everything, and take a chance.
Thank you. Now, Tom, since I have you on the mic,
yeah.
I think you were one of my big shockers this year. I met you in January. We saw your work. I saw your work, your previous assemblages and sculptures. And to see the work that you did for this exhibition, it really blew my mind. You work with photography and themes of deconstructing and reconstructing, rebuilding on something to make sure it still works, to make sure that you can mend it. And it felt like a very vulnerable exercise for you, and a very vulnerable work for me to experience, and hopefully for everybody else who sees it in person. Would you tell us a little bit more about why that changed? What inspired you to make this work?
Yes, well, I had a lot of other ideas in mind. Well, not a lot, but a few other ideas, and they were all pretty angry and about what the world is going through now, not just the pandemic, but all the hate and all the the discourse that we're all experiencing. I just didn't want to do it. I had other ideas, and I just thought I can't give back my time anymore. So I had to just break away from that and do something that was nicer and more calming for myself. And it almost became like a performance piece, but then I realized like I was the only one that was seeing it, but it was okay. I felt just there was a cathartic experience to build this thing and to make it. And when I left it at the gallery, and I got home, and I really missed it. So it was something that I'm looking forward to seeing it again in person.
Yes, we can see on the screen, everybody. You can see Tom's work for this exhibition. As you can tell just from the image, it looks like there's some cuts, and maybe it was put together like a puzzle. And what Tom is referring to is that there's a photography and a construction that he did. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the layering and the meaning of that?
it's a number of photographs. I think it's 7 or 8 of the same photograph. And as I built it, I folded it and I, kind of destroyed it a little bit and then patched it up and repaired it. And you get that little sense of victory when you repair something. And so I kept doing that over and over, and wanted to keep the integrity of the photograph, but still just to show I wanted to have some depth to it. So it's like I say, it's like 7 or 8 photographs, and but I wanted to keep that one image as repair and replace kind of thing.
Yes, it's not too perfect. It is the same image. We can see the shape, we can see the figure of a woman, and it's blurry and it has layers, but it's not absolutely perfect, which I think
it is imperfect in the way that I think most things are, but still there's something there that is very very close to me anyway.
Yes, it really makes us think about the reality of our own relationships with ourselves and with others. It really makes me think of memory. Maybe the more layers you see, you're trying to remember how the picture looked in the first time. And then with that, I'm gonna go with Maddie. Thank you, Tom. Maddie, in your work, you have a lot of recurring themes of memory, in a way that you remember spaces, and that's what you build, that's what you reconstruct, a little bit similar like Tom. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about your practice and what is something that's integral to it?
Yeah, so my background is in painting and printmaking, but the past couple years I've definitely sort of dipped my toes into sculpture a little bit more, and also using fabric and stitching is also very important to my practice. I always start with live sketches of these spaces that I remember, and like I mentioned in the video, for the work specifically that's in the show, I decided to kind of break out of my normal formula that I've been working in, and these have been kind of more experimental pieces for me. I think kind of like Tom, taking like a bit of a jump with these pieces, which was really fun for me to make, to be honest. So they're referencing architectural elements of these domestic interiors that I've previously occupied in some way, and also the everyday objects that occupy those spaces, especially the first slide and this slide. And then the canvas piece that's in the show, I remember talking to Fa about it. I had stretched this canvas and didn't know what to do with it, and decided to kind of work more intuitively, which I think you can see in these other 2 pieces as well, which was a little bit of a exercise in letting go, I think. Most of my work I tend to plan out in advance, really think about, okay, I'm going to use these colors. The colors are always based off of objects from these spaces that I'm talking about, and be very intentional with those decisions going into making the work. But I think the 3 pieces that I have in the show definitely all tie together, and that I was kind of working in a more intuitive way and giving myself a little bit more room to play.
Absolutely. And the color choices that you make are the most vibrant of the show. I would love to know, this piece that's on the screen right now, it's called Hiding Behind the Radiators.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I would really want you to talk about the color choice and the different pieces. I don't know if you can tell, all of you audiences, from the picture, but it's made of wood, and there's actually wood layerings on it, and plastic as well.
Yeah. So I feel like with these pieces, so like I said, I tend to pick my color palette by basing it off of objects from the spaces I'm talking about. So let's say the color of a lampshade, a color from a rug, something like that. But with these, I decided to kind of crank that up a little bit. So rather than taking it so literally, as I have in the past in previous work, taking it just kind of like as a little bit of a jumping off point. But then, you know, I was very intentional about wanting to use brighter colors, about wanting to use iridescent fabrics. So the component that's at the top is actually 2 different layers of iridescent fabric that are layered on top of each other. There's the pink plexi acrylic tube, the neon pink tube, and then the little component at the bottom is actually has acrylic paint, but also has glitter on it as well. And so typically with my pieces, I tend to have some cutouts, and I really like having the play of the shadows from the piece interact, you know, with the gallery wall and kind of engage the space that they are living in. And by using, I tend to use like very matte acrylic paint. It's kind of what I had previously been doing, but now, you know, using these iridescent and fluorescent colors and fabrics and materials, I'm having kind of fun playing with how light actually bounces off of the pieces as well. So not just thinking about the shadows and that kind of layering of the space, but also thinking about how they can maybe be a little reflective. And yeah.
Thank you. I don't know if this is my interpretation or just an extra thought. Maybe, you know, becoming a mother this year, has that informed your artworks at all?
You know, it's funny because I was talking with someone about this recently, and it's hard to tell what is because of the baby, what is because of the pandemic. So my husband and I had our first child at the beginning of March. So the world literally went crazy while we were in the hospital. So I think that one thing is that she has brought a lot of like joy to us, especially during such a weird time. And I think that's definitely translated into my work a little bit more. And I think kind of encouraged me to take some of those choices to kind of, you know, these are a lot of these materials are things I've played around with a little bit in the past, but have never really fully jumped into like really committing to using them in a more serious way. And so I think both, you know, having the baby, but also, you know, the pandemic and thinking, why not, you know, just kind of let me feel like I had that freedom to sort of jump in and really use these materials. And I think the other way that I work, I think, you know, especially at the beginning when I started going, my studio's in Northeast DC, it's in Ivy City. It's very close to my house, which is great, which means I've been able to go up to my studio for like 2-hour chunks while she's napping, you know, or my husband will have a break from work phone call, so I will go up there. And so I think I've learned even more so how to like work in manageable chunks and kind of, you know, I'll work for a couple hours or however many hours I have and then like leave a to-do list for the next day, you know, the next time I come back. So I think it's made me be a little bit more efficient with my time in the studio as well.
It's wonderful. I'm gonna answer Karen, who has sent a question for me and asked about the meaning of an underdefined state of life, which is if you receive the postcard from DCACs with the invitation for this show and the little statement, I say how we're exploring through these artworks, which include, you know, painting, photography, and even site-specific installation. We really explore the ambiguity of our spaces and time and an underdefined state of life. By that, I meant I was trying to, you know, echo the concept of Zygmunt Bauman of liquid modernity, in which our present state of life is not really solid and completely perfect, completely defined. We know exactly what's going to happen. It's an idea that we'd like to have as humans of everything being structured and having a place, having a plan, having a schedule, but playing with the uncomfortable comfort in this underdefined, is this letting go a little bit and keep our spaces more fluid. That's what I meant by an underdefined not so rigid state of life. I want to continue with Shayna to stay in the theme of color. Shayna, your work that we've seen previously, and you've had a couple of shows this year. Congratulations. They're very colorful. They remind me also, they feel like they would go well with Maddie's, even outside of a Sparkplug collective. Tell us a little bit more about your work with color and the materials felt and how it has evolved, especially during this year.
Well, this year has been a pretty dramatic shift for me. I mentioned in the video that I was doing my first artist residency, and so I was in Finland in March when everything sort of shifted, and so I came home under duress, and it really like everybody else, it just affected my practice, my way of thinking, my way of coping, and I had a really hard time making art when I came back for a couple of months, just trying to make sense of the world. So what eventually got me back into the studio was two-pronged. I started teaching remotely, so I was teaching felting to a single student remotely, and at the same time I took a wire weaving class from Hannah Vogel, who is a Philadelphia-based wire artist or sculptor, and I would not have had access to her class previously because she only taught in person. So I learned this new technique. I was teaching somebody a new technique, and it sort of got me back in the flow in the studio. And that has been a slower process for me this year. So when we were talking about what we were going to do for the show, I really had no idea. I wanted something new, but I had no idea what I was going to create. And so I really leaned in to your direction and to your prompts, and sort of turned my own process upside down to make Gravitas, which like I said in the video, I don't have words for yet because it's so new to me in terms of both the process and the product.
This is also one of the pieces that really surprised me in the best of ways. I feel like all of you guys really took it to a very, very different level with this exhibition, and I'm honored that I was part of that dialogue and this conversation. With Gravitas, for those of you who are only watching the photograph, who hasn't seen it in person, it's made out of wool and resin, these little drops, and they're hanging by wire, also connected to a spiral sculpture that's attached to the wall. Those pieces are variable in sizes. They can be stretched longer and shorter, and they actually move. If you can see the shadows, I think that's a really wonderful photograph. With the shadows in the background, they move just as they react to the air around them and to people walking, maybe touching. Do you feel comfortable with people touching your artwork?
Yeah, I'm fine with it. I mean, I got used to that when I was making soft sculpture. People just can't help but touch. And actually, when I was making it at home, they didn't have an air current. So when we installed it in the gallery, and it just happened to be right where the air conditioner blows and they started to sway, like the piece came alive for me. And so it's made me think about what the next piece is and how I incorporate movement into future pieces, because it really generated even more thoughts about future work, how to make something a little more both interactive and just active.
I feel like when you said the name of the piece, Gravitas, gravity, you really brought together all of the concepts that we were discussing all throughout the year about physics and sociology and philosophy, but the physics component of all of these works really, really gravitated towards that unifying concept. It's not just a fluid state of life and the matter, everything floating away, but you really just grounded all of us. I really am fascinated by your work. Speaking of physics and science, I'm gonna go, I know she's smiling, she knew it was her. I'm gonna talk with Sarah Hall right now. Sarah, tell us about your practice, the piece in particular that you created for this show, which I'll let you explain it a little bit more, and your relationship with physics and your personal perceptions of it.
So the piece that I created for this show, it surprised me a lot. When we had my initial conversation with Fa, I was talking about a smaller piece, something that again might be in my normal 8x8, maybe something up to 13 by 21. But as things sort of happened, and I read Liquid Times, I read a few other books, and I started thinking about all these changes. And my partner is a physicist, and I had never taken a physics class in my entire life. That usually kept me from anything that I was doing in the sciences. And I never found a teacher that was right for me. But through conversations with him, he does work with transition metal dichite halogenides, which are monolayers, which are basically two-dimensional semiconductors. And the most common one is graphene. So everyone can take a pencil and just draw a line, and that's a line of graphene. And I was thinking, with this piece, I started thinking about layering and these materials that fundamentally function differently. I was trained as an architect, so there are lots of debates at my home about whether or not a material can actually be just two dimensions. And as trained as an architect, everything has three dimensions. So I started talking with him more about these materials, and when they're formed in the lab, sometimes they are formed and they're single layer, and then there are other layers that sort of build up, and they have to kind of carve them off. So through this process, I was thinking about that, and as I was working on the piece, I really started to think about thinness and absorption and how the layers interact with each other, and how really to freeze a moment in time in my process. And because I'm working with these pieces, there's such a meditative aspect to them. How do I take and show people what I'm seeing through my process? So there are lots of things coming into play with this piece. And the fact that it became 54 inches by 54 inches surprised me. I spent a lot of hours on our couch watching Downton Abbey and stitching, and allowing it to just develop in that way that it came into being.
It's really a wonderful piece because you can see the layerings, especially in person. It's not just a painting, it's not just a canvas. You paint over it, you use gesso, you stitch on it. I love how even the single threads that are floating, they are quote unquote floating, but also they occupy a space within the grid, which again gives us this balance between order and control, and then just letting go, which I feel like it was a fantastic conceptual creation. So I really thank you for participating, for continuing in the conversation on this theme, and really contributing to this process.
Thank you.
Now, Steve, you're also another one of those artists who were really, from day one, you and I feel like we clicked on all these science and metaphysics and what is time and what is space conversations. So tell us a little bit more about your piece, which, by the way, was the site-specific installation at the gallery.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure what to do initially with this exhibition, and I didn't want to just put up pieces that I created before or make new similar work. I wanted to do something different. So I had an idea in my head to do a site-specific installation, and I had a specific design in my head based on many years that I've been to DCAC, and then I went to take measurements, and while I was there in the space, which often happens, I scrapped it and came up with something different completely. I spent a good while there taking measurements and just being in the space. So the whole idea behind it is to create a work that interrupts the space, but doesn't completely block it or is not obtrusive in a way. So as you can see in this photo, you can see through it. It does take up space physically. It occupies, a mass in the space, but it also has a certain ethereal quality to it. Similar to Shayna's piece, when one of the times I went there during installation, the air was on, and boy, it was like a sail in the wind. It was going everywhere, which was kind of cool. So I mean, I wanted the piece to play with the space, to be as if it was part of the space, to sort of redefine the space in a sense, and not to feel like it's imposing on the space. Those are the basics of it. I'm always playing with sort of blurring boundaries and edges, and so this is, there's multiple layers here because the fabric is intentionally unfixed on the bottom, so it's always sort of not exactly outlining the outline of the footprint, but the light on the bottom does sort of hold a solid boundary almost. Mm-hmm. And then there's a sonic aspect, which is by nature omnidirectional, so it feels like it occupies the whole space in a sense.
It does. I feel like that decision of not attaching the fabric to the floor and letting the light delineate but the fabric kind of flow, especially as you mentioned with the air conditioning or people visiting, it moves with you, similar to Shayna's work. There's kind of like a playful component. I don't know if my interpretation, you're making fun almost of the barrier. You're letting it, redefine what it is and react to our presence as well.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Yeah, that's what I mean by sort of blurring edges. I want to create things that exist sort of in the fuzziness of barriers, so you don't know where the line is, kind of, and that could be, a small spectrum or a very wide spectrum of blurriness. But the idea is that you can't put your finger on it. There's no one spot where the edge is, and that's true in my music as well. So, yeah, that's very much a very accurate observation. Yeah.
Thank you, because it does occupy a space. It looks like it belongs there already. It doesn't obstruct our vision, but also our way of walking around in the gallery. It fits really well. And the playfulness with the barriers reminds me to Sarah Stefana-Smith's work, who but in contrast of your work, instead of building a barrier, she uses barrier materials to create a new work, an abstraction, using chicken wire, deer barriers, all of these materials meant to keep out or limit something. Tell us a little bit more about your piece, Sarah. Unmute.
I am muted. Okay. Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you for that, Fa. This piece is called Flag to the Abyss, and I think in many ways I try to kind of focus on that line of demarcation and then exacerbate it, but trying to do that with the material. So as you mentioned, I'm using a whole bunch of these sort of like what I call barrier materials to construct a kind of new organic piece. And in many ways, I think about the objects and the things that I make as a kind of conversation with other aspects of my life, much of which is reading and thinking and writing. And so I'm actually referencing this Caribbean poet and scholar, Edouard Glissant, who talks about things like the right to opacity, and he's referencing kind of post-colonial Martinique as this sort of space and suggesting that withholding, not being explicitly transparent becomes a useful sort of strategy for the post-colonial subject. And so I think the way that I was sort of responding to your provocation, Fa, to sort of think about states of being, whether it's through thinking about time or about, one of the easy metaphors for me is state changes between water, air, ice, was to sort of think about how I can transform a material so it kind of exceeds the thing that it's actually used for, and then play with that through sort of abstract forms of language. So both the way in which it kind of moves back and forth, like it engages with the space, you can see through the space, etc. And then there's this contradiction. How do you actually mark a territorial space of something called the abyss, something that is immeasurable and unknowable? And so it can kind of hold that tension, which in many ways I think becomes the possible, you know, the way the barrier or what have you kind of exceeds the thing that it actually is supposed to do.
Thank you so much. I feel like that piece, it was also quite a challenge to figure out how it belonged in this space. And I remember in one of our earlier conversations, like, it should be hanging from the ceiling. I remember seeing in your studio, you weave these different plastic and different materials onto basically a giant loom that you install on your wall. And you also work with photography. So how has your practice informed this new technique that you're experimenting with?
Yeah, this is definitely new territory for me. I've talked about other objects that I've made as photo-based weavings where I was literally weaving paper and photographic information into like bird netting, the bird netting as the grid. But here I really had to kind of like do a little research and do some learning and push the boundaries of my skill. And I would, as a little plug for the usefulness of Sparkplug, some of this was about me having conversations with people that knew how to do it. So Shayna was one of those sort of resources in terms of like, well, why don't you try doing this thing? She'd let me use her loom for like her spinning wheel for like months. So on the one hand, there's like this element of like using weaving techniques, learning how to crochet in certain kinds of ways, different kinds of rope making and knot making ways to kind of create mass. To kind of build out this particular piece and object. But again, it kind of goes back to how I sort of think of my practice and process as always a discussion or a conversation with a whole bunch of different kinds of people and things. And so it's likely that I will take photographs of this work and it'll find its way in projections where I kind of project macro moving kinds of images on more installation sort of elements, because I'm also interested in the way the light and the space and the shadow sort of interacts with the work. And here it's kind of like an opportunity, you know, in terms of thinking about spatializing the object within this particular piece within a space. I think what's so wonderful about something like this is it evolves and it shifts. In every iteration, you come up with a different orientation and people are invited to engage with the work based on its proximity to something else, its proximity to a wall, its proximity to a transparent, very tactile fabric, etc. And that becomes also a part of what the work does and how people are asked to respond to it.
You're totally right. Plus the transparency. I feel like we had lots of conversations about the use of the material, but leaving those empty spaces that are still, there are negative space. That the transparency to me translated to honesty, because you really can't hide. If something is transparent or translucent, you can see right through it. That's what it means. You don't have a lot of room for hiding things. It's just a really honest work, and feature next, behind, in front, depending on where you're positioned, to Steve's work. It really, I feel like it just made sense to have these two transparencies go through each other. The fact that it's hanging in from the ceiling also gives visitors the room to go from the front or from the back, looking at it from different angles. And thank you so much. This was a really, really exciting work to see throughout the year, to see the process of it. And, you know, evolution seems to be quite a theme. I'm gonna talk with Lizzie right now, whose work plein air paintings really evolved from the figurative, the space that exists in reality, and how she makes new compositions of these imagined both past and future spaces in the same realm. Lizzie, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your pieces for the show?
Sure, yeah. So Fa gave us we had this really wonderful dialogue over the past few months while through Zoom and kind of talking about this idea, and it morphed into a lot of different things. But her main prompt that really got me excited in terms of states of being was thinking about, as other artists have talked about, how different spaces can change over time. And I think that was what I was thinking about with this work, specifically landscape and how it's responding to climate change, and how individuals and communities are responding to natural disasters that are happening at an increased pace that we can't control, but that we can also control, and how we're working to regenerate these spaces in response to disasters that are happening, and things that might seem really overwhelming at the moment, but just I've really been interested in how human determination can regenerate these spaces very quickly. So these works are really small, so they're 12 by 12 and they're oil on panel, but they reflect a larger environment and a larger sense of landscape. And thinking just about the present time and space that we're in now, and how the future is going to change and how we will respond to that. So a lot of my colors come from plein air, and I like to paint outside a lot and work there and kind of lift those colors out, and that influences kind of my choices in terms of my palette. And from there, I kind of remix the images together to create these landscapes that would otherwise not exist. And then from there, I respond to the painting itself, and just it kind of tells me what it needs and what it doesn't need, and hopefully it is able to stand on its own after I create it in that way.
Yeah, I feel like to paint on plein air, for those of you who, maybe are not, art heads or French speakers, it means to paint in plein air, to paint outdoors. And so I feel like that definitely, I can see how it informs your color palette and your topics. But at the same time, it feels very poetic in a year where we're supposed to stay either inside or outdoors, very, very distanced. I think that you were one of those who had, you came from South Africa to visit, and then you got stuck in the US.
Yeah. So I think I responded to, the pandemic. Someone's question in the chat was how we've responded to the pandemic specifically. And I think I've just been thinking about that recently. The pandemic is something that is a larger reflection of how our planet is going to change in the future. And for me, landscape and natural environments, I've seen them change throughout my time, just short time on this planet, but just thinking about how we can respond and show that resiliency as humans, and kind of work towards regenerating this planet in positive ways.
Yes, and just as a note, I do want to clarify that even though this exhibition exists during the COVID pandemic, it doesn't exist because of it. The theme that we talked about, all the works that you created, we started working on this. I mean, you've been working with Sparkplug for 2 years, and I came on year 2 to kind of guide you and to have a dialogue with all of you, to direct more or less a closing exhibition. But we've been discussing this since January, before we were consumed by the present reality. And so it means a lot that this show is not a reaction to the global pandemic, more so just a continuation of what was already happening. And now, the mic was dropped. The world has dropped their mic. And And speaking, I'm going to invite Alexandra to share a little bit about her and her practice, because we're still, immersed in this theme of change, regeneration, climate change, and Alexandra's photos for this show, not only thematically, they include these themes, but even your process. It is a very regenerative process of making photographs and manipulating the film. Talk to us a little bit more about that, Alexandra.
Sure. Well, I think I really like the idea of when you manipulate the film, so much, especially when you're working with film and you're working in a darkroom, is about control and precision, and manipulating the film and bringing some of the local resources, in the case of the photos on the wall, water from the Mississippi River, into that process and leaving that room for experimentation and play to happen, to not really quite know what the result is going to be and how it's going to be distorted and not have a chance to even see it until it's done. It's kind of, once you set it in motion, you don't know what it's going to look like until you've finished processing the film, and you have this risk of loss. What if it doesn't get processed properly? I mean, which you have all the time when you're working in the darkroom anyways. I've been processing film for over 25 years, and every time I go to roll some film to process it, I'm always like, oh, I hope I don't mess this up. And now it's like opening this collaboration of what mess it up could look like, because you have no clue whatsoever. There's no way to stop it once you start the process, if that makes sense.
Yes, and it absolutely just merged into what we had discussed throughout the year. This necessity of having control is what makes us feel comfortable, or the idea that we have at all any control in our situations in life, at work, with our own bodies. It makes us feel like we're safe. And there's nothing wrong with it, but it's just a sensation. It's an idea, but physically we really cannot control the processes. So I feel like with your photography, the fact that you take the risk and are vulnerable enough and even confident enough of trusting the process, it's really beautiful. I know that installing these works, we talked a lot about how are they going to be framed, should they be enclosed, how do we make them float, and having them framing white was a decision that eventually we thought, oh, actually it mimics the wall, so it kind of disappears without it feeling that these pictures are enclosed. And if you go to the gallery by appointment only, you can go that as you go up the stairs, the picture that you see first will be right in front of you is the picture of a staircase as well, going up a house, which would be this picture at the very right edge that's on the screen right now, which was, on purpose trying to see, okay, well, I'm going up the stairs, I'm seeing the stairs, I am surrounded by these ethereal sheer fabric, and the stairs that I see in front are also kind of like foggy, and I feel like it does bring a certain continuation to the whole room. That was one of my most exciting works to install and to see, especially because, as I said, you really let go and let elements work on your pieces, and that's really brave. I commend you for that. I would like to invite Alanna, who also created 3 pieces, mirroring the works of Alexandra. She has 3 pieces on the show, also black and white, and your themes are more on identity and belonging, the memory of your body, but also ancestral and almost cellular memory, and how it expresses itself through your work. Would you tell us more about your pieces?
Yeah, so I hope I touched on this somewhat clearly in my introduction video, but as Fa said, my work is based in identity, and just kind of reconnecting with my family and learning more about myself. But more recently, I've tried to open up that discussion just because I'm curious in how other people have developed a vocabulary for their own identity and how we can kind of exchange and support each other in becoming more comfortable with ourselves. And in these works, I'm looking more at kind of what are our foundations for identity. And again, I'm kind of referencing kind of lightly here, you might not be able to see it immediately, but I'm referencing kind of just childhood activities that you might do, a lot of like creative exercises that would help you in that. And for me in particular, I of course had like a lot of like coloring books and dolls and things like that, but I also did a lot of like fiber arts. I really liked cross stitch. I liked playing with latch hook kits, and that was because I saw my maternal grandmother using those mediums a lot, and that was something that I kind of wanted to learn myself in order to be connected with her. And so I play around with that a lot in my work, and I kind of use it now as a way to build upon works. My practices, I usually will make something with the intention of revisiting it, not the next day, but maybe, you know, months later, once something kind of speaks to me, and I'll build on it with another medium. So in this piece here, I started with a print, and if you look closely, you can see that the black silhouettes are overlaid with cross stitch. And so what I'm trying to express here is that in terms of identity, is that this object here, it's a Caribbean fruit. It's one that I reference a lot in my work, and it's one that I remember from my childhood. I remember my father sharing it with me, and I really loved it. And so I have the memory of that, and I'm just continuing to build on it and construct it. And what I'm building on it is kind of my own perception of it at this point. Yeah.
And I feel like really that encompasses, that really threads in, no pun intended, but it threads in the theme of the show with states of being. We talked a lot about, sure, the physics and the social components of a liquid state and liquid modernity, but really what we meant was that everything that's happening, we build on top of it. And that's what gives us this uncertainty and the necessity of feeling okay and feeling comfortable with the uncertainty, because we don't really know how things are going to work out. With your work, I know that building on those layers, it's such a personal statement of yours, and the fact that you revisit these pieces, you really let them breathe, you ponder, and then it's like when you read a book, you can only reread a book once you read it first. Once you read it once, you can't read it all over again because you already have information there. What you're doing is adding to it. I think it's something really beautiful. And I feel like almost, you know, all of you guys really took this theme and, you know, from our discussions of past, present, future, how do we connect this very basic, very common knowledge concepts, or the typical concepts that we know in time, which are past, present, and future, with the conceptual, you know, the terms that we learn on time, which is, or states of the matter, gas, solid, and liquid. And all of those, you know, those three terms can connect really depending on how we all interpret them. I remember the first time I brought those terms up, I was set that the past was solid because it already happened, because it happened, it's set in stone. The present is the liquid, we're living it, we can't really control it, things will change. And then the future is gas. The future is is, you know, untangible. It hasn't happened. It's all in the imaginary. However, the more I talk with all of you and the more you know, were building on your works, suddenly the past became gas because it was a memory and it was a little nebulous and you were trying to reconstruct and regenerate. Then the present was solid. The present was something that you could control, or maybe the future was solid because you had a plan. So I think that was something really beautiful and really special to even I coming with an idea and a direction for this show. Really, it just takes the whole group and not just, you know, the Sparkpluggers, but the Sparkplug administrative team, everybody in the gallery. We were in conversation, you know, daily, weekly, and that's what makes this work and this exhibition so special for me. I want to acknowledge a couple of questions to, you know, open this floor for public Q&A. Thank you so much for all the participants and for all of you artists for your wonderful interpretations and your contributions. Let's see, I'm gonna start with, I think Audrey, where are we? Mentioned something about how the pandemic, how this current crisis reflects, let's see, where are we? If anybody else sees it, you can shout it out, read it out loud.
Here, I can read it to you if you'd like. Has the pandemic permanently changed anyone's practice, or does everyone expect to get back to the way things were done when we come out the other side?
Would like to go first. Go, Maddie.
I think one thing that it has changed is not having studio visits in person. That's something I really miss and I think I really crave, is just having friends or curators or whoever just like physically in my space, because I think we're able, you know, with being online, able to kind of curate more like what we're actually showing to the world, versus there's something very vulnerable about having someone else in your space and, you know, seeing, you know, maybe that little piece in the corner that you're trying to hide, or seeing, you know, your work area and understanding, maybe getting an insight into how your brain works. So I think, you know, obviously like thankful for, you know, Zoom and FaceTime, all these technologies, you know, that we can use to still connect, which has been wonderful. But I think that's something that has changed that I really miss, and that I really hope comes back as soon as it's safe to do so.
Go ahead, Sarah.
I think also echoing what Maddie was saying about missing the studio visits and that interaction, but in terms of the actual day-to-day practice, and what I've learned from this practice is pretty much like having a solitary residency with yourself and your work for the past 8 months, and that's kind of how I've felt it's been. So I've gotten to know my work in ways that I don't think I would have had the opportunity to learn about my work had this not have happened, had there distractions of having to go here and there and travel. And it really gave me time to sit with my work and my practice. And I hope and challenge myself internally and say, how can I push this even further without having access to that I've had previously? And for me, I hope to maintain that, but still add what Maddie is talking about having the access to in real life visits, hopefully very soon.
Does anybody else have something to add? If not, we can go to Karen's question. She says, congratulations all. This is a stunning culmination of your time together. Karen would like to know, what is the biggest fear that you all had at the start of this program 2 years ago, and how it was resolved over the 2 years? Go ahead, Shayna.
So at the beginning of the 2 years, my biggest fear was that 2 years was a long time. And now that we're at the end of it, I'm like, I need another year with these people. So yeah, that was my biggest fear. It was just, it seemed like a commitment when in fact, like I really could do this longer. So it was sort of dissipating.
Someone else? you're a completely fearless group. Nobody has any fear. I know that I had the fear, even though I haven't been with the Sparkplug for 2 years, only one, a little less than one. My fear was that I came too late for to the game, and I thought that I felt very intimidated at first. This is a really beautiful, really, fantastic group of a reputable institution as well. DCAC has been around like 40 years. And here I was, invited very informally at first by Carolyn, and then having a conversation with all of you in person. I felt like I was being, I was interviewing for a job, and I really wanted it. So that was definitely a little intimidating. And then after 2, conversations, it became like, oh, they're all friends. They're all really just nice to each other. It was pretty much like watching the British baking show. I was like, they're all there to help each other. They all make incredible cakes. They're all right at what they do, and they have amazing stories, and they also want everybody else to succeed. Like, how wonderful of an experience. This is, I think, one of the best residencies that, DC has to offer. Now, from Carolyn, she says she's curious to what degree the collaborative process of creating an exhibit influenced the artist's creative process for your final pieces. Who would like to go? Come on, Lizzie.
To answer that question, I think, I don't know if it reflects others in the group, but just having the group to keep us going and having these regular meetings together, and having Fabi, this amazing curator, and Jerry helping us move along and be organized and chiming in and helping us just get the show together. I think if I hadn't had that in my state of moving around every few weeks, I wouldn't have made work. And so having this group really pushed me to make work even when I didn't feel like it, knowing that I would get some feedback and have some community there. So I really appreciate that. And I think others kind of reflect that too. And talking to others throughout this time, we really needed each other at this time. And it was collaborative in that way. So I appreciated that conversation that we had.
Someone else has a comment? Go ahead, Steve.
I can say something. I agree with Lizzie that I was touch and go for a while there and weren't sure what was going to happen, and it could be in person or not in person. And for me personally, there were a couple of moments where I thought maybe I just won't participate. If it's like, there's a lot of stuff were up in the air, but it came together really nicely. And then the piece itself for me personally was very much contingent on the rest of the show, because it's not a solo show, so I could not take over the whole space. It had to be something that worked with the space and worked with everybody else in the space. So it was, it had to fit a group show. So yeah, very much so. That was very much informed by being a collaborative group show.
Mm. All right, now the DCAC is 31 years old, not 30. So yay, congratulations. Even more of a reputable and solid institution in DC. Now Eric, who I also have to shout out. Eric is a former Sparkplugger who for this residency, for this program, was really, really present, assisting everybody, not just the artists, but even myself as, my exhibit assistant and installer while I was injured. So really amazing job on keeping everybody energized and encouraged, and giving us, advice from your previous experience with Sparkplug and DCAC. Eric asked, how are your particular works connected, or how do they reflect the theme of the show? We've been talking throughout the night, but if there's something specific that any of you think, oh wow, this is what really, that's the link that I build between my work and the theme, you go ahead. Not everybody at the same time though.
I didn't do my homework for this. Curse it. I can say something. like you were saying earlier, we clicked a lot with the theme. I mean, it's my wheelhouse, the whole business of memory and uncertainty and physics, and not that the work that I did reflects it, but but it kind of actually overwhelmed me a little bit, because I thought there was too much that I could do with it, and I didn't know where to start. And something I can't, that's why I said I didn't do my homework, but there was some sentence in the description that you said that was my my out. In a sense, I was like, that clicks, and I'm going to go with that. And then it sort of took me on a different mental path, and then I decided to do installation, and then that sort of settled in. But initially, I was thinking too much in the too close to the theme, in a sense, and working with what I already know, making pieces and things like that. So yeah, I just can't remember the exact sentence, but it was definitely based on something.
We'll go through the artist statement, through the exhibition statement. We'll share it with the visitors so they know. Maybe they'll find out which was the sentence. That
was good. Yeah, running Waldo. But anyway, that's my statement. Yeah.
Sure. Shayna, go ahead. I think you had something to say as well.
Yeah. So, like I said before, I was having a hard time just making work in general, and so being able to use the prompt during one of our group meetings, Steve suggested that we take all the writing that you had done and boil it down to one sentence. And so after I did that, it was really clear that I had something to like chew on instead of like being overwhelmed by it. And so I took it very literally in a couple of respects. So the states of being as liquid, gas, solid, and then my materials became, okay, so the wool part was my gas because the being that produced it breathes. So that was really easy. And then the solid was the wire, iron, steel. And the fluid was or liquid was the resin. So, and then those ended up sort of matching up with me personally, that the wool is the past, my material. The resin is my future because it's plastic and it can take me like flowing into the future. And then the present was just the wire because that's what I have been learning during this period. So it was really nice to have these sort of tangible, like, oh, this makes sense. And now I'm going to use all these materials to make a thing. And then really exploring that in a very atypical way for me was it was actually a gift. So thank you, Fa, for your words and your encouragement.
Thank you. And I don't know that people know what the work of a curator is. And it's just a lot of writing, basically. Even my work evolved from the first, I remember I sent you all like a PowerPoint presentation. This is my train of thought. And it was all black and was like, I'm thinking about this, which makes me think of this. And I just listed it. Then that translated into paragraphs that eventually had to also evolve to make sense, because it was just me babbling. And I feel like just as much as you guys take a concept, take an idea and make something tangible out of that, that was me with the writing. It's like, these are all the things that are floating. How do we make it tangible and understanding and understandable and accessible? So language, it really became the tool that, I play with, and I'm glad that you all liked it. Sarah, I think you had something to say, and we have a few minutes left, but Sarah Smith, why don't you go ahead?
I'm actually trying to remember the question, but I know I had some things that I wanted to share. And part of it was that I actually really was excited about the theme and how it sort of came together. I also feel like it mirrors an orientation to process and flexibility and change. And it implied that for me. And while I think the making of the piece, thinking about how much time I had and all of that was a little bit overwhelming, what was really exciting about thinking about the theme, making a work, what was also informal pipelines of conversation that were happening in Sparkplug where people would actually show elements of their work in process. and getting to kind of get a sense of how different artists were sort of responding to and interpreting the theme. And even when I look at the work now and after, I think that that's the thing that's sort of most curious to me is how different people in the group respond to a shared collective set of ideas through medium and material and thinking, because it continues a conversation. I mean, I keep saying conversations and discussions that I think are that I think are totally indicative of what this idea of states of being really actually suggests: process, orientation, perspective, shift, flexibility, even as we create our own structure of meaning around it. And so I think that that was what was really exciting about it, and then seeing it transition into a physical show, an exhibition.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sarah. I think we're going to close with one last question. This comes from Jerry, who says that receiving criticism about one's art can create a moment of crisis, maybe for some artists. And he's curious if anybody in the group received a comment or feedback during the critique that made them rethink the way they were doing things. How did you practice? How did your practice evolve and subsequent work change? And I feel like after that, we're gonna have to say goodbye because it's 2 minutes to 8. But if anybody has, go ahead, Alanna.
I guess just when I read Jerry's question, it kind of made me think of, you know, like a bad critique. And I just wanted to quickly say, I think everyone in this group did such an amazing job in our critiques, and not saying like, oh, like, I just don't like this or something like that. Everyone was always really positive and asked really amazing questions that kind of encouraged everyone else in their own making. And I don't know if anyone felt differently, but I never felt, you know, bad about my work. I loved everyone else's work, and I don't know, it just kind of made me more curious about everyone else's practices and styles of making. You know, I think like the closest thing to like a crisis would be, I think I remember in my studio visit, I remember Eric commenting on a picture that I shared for this session. It's titled Limon, and it's a picture of my paternal grandfather that I've embroidered over. And I remember Eric mentioning that it kind of looked like I was more dissecting or kind of exploding that image rather than, you know, piecing something together. And it really made me like, it just made me question it. But, you know, all of my practice is about people perceiving things differently. So I didn't take it as a negative, but it did make me sit with that work a little bit more and think about it differently.
Yeah, I think that's something that this group in particular really showed, is that you weren't really trying to like destroy or like dissect each other's work. The critique doesn't mean just I don't like it, but questioning it. What does it mean, and why did you do this? To make us also question our practice and have more depth into it. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I would just echo Alanna's comments, and you know, it's all of our critiques, I think, can be characterized with one quality, which is a lot of people were very curious. So you know, a lot of people gave opinions, but it was always like, you know, tell me more about this, or why did you do it this way, or something like that, which generated, you know, positive conversations rather than, you know, get out of my face, I don't like it kind of thing, or something like that. And I think that is the fundamental reason why we clicked so well, and you know, nobody wants to kill anybody, at least as far as I know, because everybody was curious and everybody was genuinely interested in everybody's work and the person behind the work as well. Mm-hmm. And I think that made it much more positive than it you know, might be otherwise.
Yes, curiosity is key. Now, before we end, I wanted to give one last shout to all the artists, the team behind the gallery. One of the artists couldn't be with us tonight, Azadeh. We still, we love her, and she's been integral to this group and this practice. So I wanted to shout out to her. And, a reminder that the videos that the artist made are in the DCAC's YouTube page, so you can go and check them out. And that you can visit the exhibition. Right now we're in pandemic mode. However, you can make an appointment. You have a time slot for a private visit to this exhibition, to this space, and you can do that. I think Leah put the link on the chat, but you can also go to dcartcenter.org to make sure to visit the show.